Control 2 got announced at the Game Awards at the time of recording. That was yesterday. It's been my most anticipated game for a long time now. And like a lot of the previous Remedy games, I wanted to do a little bit of a trailer breakdown to find all of the secrets and little details you might have missed. Usually for these sorts of things, so for example, Alan Wake 2 and the Lake House DLC, I've done these sorts of videos for. I properly scripted and edited those together to make sure everything kind of made sense and, get the most out of it. But I'm currently swamped with work outside of the whole YouTube thing, so if I was to do that with this one, I wouldn't be getting anywhere until like January. Definitely into the new year. I've just got too much work. So this time we're going to be doing this kind of a live reaction to the video, if you will. I watched this during the Game Awards, got this up on the Remedy YouTube channel. But yeah, got the video up. We'll just kind of go and skip through it, and then anytime anything interesting comes by, we'll just stop the video and I'll go and discuss what's happening. I've gone and read all of the various PlayStation write-ups, all of the press kits that have been released up until this point. So there's a couple of details that you might not have picked up on first time watching it, but hopefully I can kind of tell you guys what's going on.
Do you feel it? Something is coming.
Now that one's just a little Easter egg, I think, to Alan Wake. If you recall the end of the AWE DLC in Control, that line plays there. A bit of an Easter egg, but the more interesting thing is just what we're going to see here. So those kaleidoscopic entity circular pattern things we saw there, I think it's a pretty safe bet. I'm like 95% certain that we can safely assume that those are some more resonance-based entities like the Polaris, Hedron, the Hiss from the first Control game. It makes sense. The title is Control Resonant and all the rest of that. A couple of different versions we saw there. I remember kind of picking it up during the live performance they had at the start of this, before this trailer played during the Game Awards proper. They kind of jumped through a couple of those patterns. One thing I noticed during that little showcase, though, that didn't really get translated into this video here, into the trailer itself, is the fact that one of those kaleidoscopic patterns we saw there kind of morphed into that from the Polaris patterns that Jesse had in the first game. So that kind of triangular down into a spiral thing that was going on there. One of those patterns, I think it was the kind of the rainbow one, kind of morphed in from that. And that's interesting because, as we'll see later in the trailer, we're playing as Dylan Feden in this game rather than Jesse. And of course, Jessie Feden had Polaris in her head as her invisible friend and the waypoint guider entity throughout the game that would tell you where your next objective is. And it's not necessarily brought up as much, but at the same time that Jessie got Polaris in her head during the ordinary AWE that kind of triggered the whole events of Control, Dylan got the same thing, so he also had Polaris in his head. Obviously, during the Control storyline, he rejected it. He felt that it had abandoned them to some extent. It felt that they had abandoned him to some extent, so he kind of forced it out and replaced it with a Hiss, and obviously everything went wrong after that. But what I'm taking from that, the fact that one of those patterns has morphed from Polaris, is that I'm going to assume that that's maybe our new resonance guide in this game. In the same way that Jesse had Polaris as like a pattern to tell you where to go, and also as like a North Star, guess what Polaris is based off of, to kind of figure out what she's doing, what her motivations are. I think it's safe to say that Dylan's probably going to have something like that, and it's probably going to be one of those patterns that play there. The other one, the kind of the dark spotlight with the dark spiral, as we'll see later on in the trailer in just a moment, I think that's probably going to be the main bad guy, the main entity that we're seeing in a lot of it, that we saw in the Lake House teaser and that we'll see later on in this trailer. This bit with the cafe.
An intrusive pattern.
Obviously, we've got the morphing there and the duplicating items and all the rest of that, which is interesting, but I'm going to talk a little more about those when we see it in the gameplay proper on the CGI bit. The only thing I'm going to mention right there is the Atlantis cafe bit. Atlantis, obviously, underwater city, under the sea, all the rest of that. Hubris and pride brought its downfall. Seeing some of the story beats we're going to see later on in the trailer, it feels like that could link to the FBC. You know, maybe they, with everything that they've experimented on and they've done, they've finally hit something even worse than the hiss, and that's caused the complete chaos that we're going to see later on in the trailer. The other thing is that Atlantis is obviously underwater, it's a sunken city, and when we're talking about the sea and water in the Remedy connected universe, which this is indeed still a part of, you're thinking Artie. So Artie the janitor and all of his things. So I think maybe take that as a hint of maybe we'll see Artie in some way. I mean, I think that's probably a safe bet, but maybe he's in that cafe or whatever, seeing as these look like they might be locations in the game.
Of staggering power.
Yeah, so very Doctor Strange things going on here. The one thing I would like to quickly point out while we're here is the signs we're seeing in the kind of the corners of the screen there, saying Thomas Street. I think it's a fair bet to say that the Thomas they're referring to, or at the very least they're referencing, whether that's an Easter egg or something in-game, is probably Thomas Zane. Of course, Alan Wake and Alan Wake 2. I think if this came up in the Alan Wake 2 trailer, like I was talking about earlier, I would probably be thinking, theory, what kind of stuff, what part is he going to play in the game? Seeing as this is Control and Thomas Zane doesn't really have much impact on the stuff they're focusing on in this game, I think it's probably safe to say that in this specific case, and another one I'll showcase later in the trailer, I think it is fair to say that this is probably just a teaser. An Easter egg, I should say. And I think I remember they're seeing Zane Street somewhere as well.
Reshaping reality as we know it.
Next shot. Stop in, and quite often here. This seems to be an FBC stronghold, like barrier, I think. You can just about see it. I didn't recognize until just now, but you can just about see the FBC emblem just in the center of the screen there, being built up to by the mode. The mode is clearly a pretty big part in the game, looking at all of this and stuff. But especially I noticed that it's one of only two things from the last game, like two entities mentioned from the last game, that the press releases and stuff are specifically mentioning. So of course that's the hiss, which we'll see later, but it also specifically singles out the mode as something else that's escaped, and clearly it's kind of gone to town on New York here, Manhattan. The other thing I would like to point out is that, as I said, this is an FBC stronghold, but also there's these couple of people here, and that's a bit interesting because they're pretty much the only people we see in the entire trailer that aren't either the playable character or like a big story character, or aren't an enemy like the hiss. They look very normal, or relatively normal considering the situation they're in. They're clearly not mutated, they got no red glowing bits, so it's safe to say that these are probably basic FBC foot soldiers, if you will. And I think that's interesting because, once again, as we'll get to later in the trailer, it seems there's a bit of a plot point that there might be a bit of conflict within the FBC. There might be two FBCs, Federal Bureaus of Control, if you will, later on in the trailer. So it's a bit curious to see whose side are these guys going to be on. Are they going to be against you, or are they going to be with you?
Everything we tried to keep inside
Warning to
eventually worms its way out.
the hiss there was nothing particularly that I noticed in that scene that's particularly unique. But of course, this is the entrance to the oldest house. We've got, it's had a number on it, run on it clearly. Got corpses littered around everywhere. We got the front door smashed in. It looks like a table or a barrier that's been knocked aside. The FBC has clearly seen better days. I'm curious what's going on there, because this isn't really representative of the hiss. Like when the hiss was attacking people in the first game, it really didn't look like this. So I'm curious. I don't think that this is the hiss. I don't think that this is supposed to represent that the hiss literally burst their way through the front door. I think they probably escaped in a bit more of a subtle, maybe not subtle, but more of a discreet way than they literally broke through the front door. So I reckon that this might be a case that someone has actually broken in to the oldest house, or at least a more physical threat has broken out, whereas the hiss is more of a noise or a kind of force rather than a physical object, if that makes sense. I don't think that this is the hiss causing all of these bodies and all the rest of that. That guy especially looks like he's got a pole stuck through his head. Jeez. Yeah, so I reckon that this is going to be another group. I mentioned back in my Control 2 concept art thing, when they first announced they were working on it, they released a concept art, that I thought that they might have a plot point where some of the paranatural terrorists that they mentioned in the first game, so the Midwest organization and the Blessed organization, might play a part. And I think that maybe this is it. I said that they might have some sort of frontal assault on the oldest house, and I reckon this might be the aftermath of something like that over the hiss. This seems a bit more physical. It's not necessarily their playing cards, their calling cards as the hiss, if you will. Oh, stopped a bit early. Let this play on just a little tiny bit longer. So, as we saw there, Dylan is clearly still in a coma after the events of Control. This is what, by the time this releases, that's going to be 7 years, I think, assuming that they stick with the whole time going by linearly alongside the release dates. It's going to be 7 years since he went into that coma, and he's still there, having grown a significantly nicer set of hair. But there's a couple of interesting things here. We have these scribbles, which now I'm looking at them, I reckon that these might be something to do with the big entity we see in the sky later on. They have that sort of kind of circular shape going on. We of course have a picture of Jesse and Dylan from 2002, so this is going to be around the time of the Ordinary accident, the Ordinary AWE that, once again, caused everything to go wrong. Well, there you go. There's a case file about the Ordinary incident. I reckon that's probably going to be copied and pasted from the original game. It's a bit too small to make out the details, but yeah, there's nothing to... Ooh, 17 surviving individuals. That might be copied and pasted from one of the documents in the first game. I don't recall something, but there's plenty of stuff like that. I don't recall that exact document. We then have the slide projector that allowed the hiss in at the start of Control, and then we've got these two extra documents we can't really see. And of course there's the big metal pole that she picked up. I'll go and talk about that in just a moment when she starts using it.
Must have had good reasons. But we were not prepared.
Bit of an awkward jump there, but Yeah, that's not necessarily what I was expecting Jessie to be doing when I first booted up the trailer. Going and grabbing a metal pipe and sticking it into her brother's head, but, you know, I'm sure she has a reason. Drop back just a little bit. Yeah, there we go. I have to say, I'm really, really liking this look for Jessie. As much as we're not playing as her, we can assume this is probably what her NPC model is going to look like, or boss model, or whatever she ends up being. And this is way, way better than her director outfit from the first game. Is it better than her leather jacket that she used in the story mode? Maybe not, but as a director, this is kind of what I expected her to look like, especially in the aftermath of the Foundation DLC, where she started to break down that relationship the FBC had between them and the board. It was kind of weird that she was still wearing a suit that had like the board pyramid as a hairpin and the board pyramid on the back of the jacket. It was a bit strange. It felt like they could have given us some sort of formal outfit that didn't have that. But this is very kind of in the field, utilitarian, we'll say, outfit, and I'm really liking it. I hope we see her wearing that in the main game. And a really nice hairstyle as well, way better than the bob things she had with the board hairpin when she went into a director's outfit in the first game. Dylan kind of looks the same as he did in the last time we saw him, just with even more hair. Slightly, I will. He seems to have different hair throughout the trailer, so he's got a completely different hairstyle where it's kind of receding backwards while he's lying on the bed. He's then, as we'll hopefully see in a moment. Let's see.
For what would follow.
Yeah, and then he's got like this sort of not quite a buzz cut, but a sort of hair thing going on here. And then he's got a man bun in the gameplay section, so I don't really know what's going on there. I do have a working theory. We'll see. As I describe it, we'll see how that goes. But it seems that this is some sort of mental astral plane, if you will, a mental plane rather than the physical world, if you couldn't have guessed from the giant pillar dropping down. But I'll kind of talk a little more about that at the end, the kind of different mental planes, the physical world, where the kind of the lines are going to be drawn here, because there is something to be said about that. And of course he's out of his cell, so maybe Jessie somehow figured out that this pole called the aberrant was somehow be able to force her brother out the coma, maybe? Like maybe this represents him finally, his mind beginning to wake up and is, starting to take control. Haha. Again, for the first time, after, all of that time spent in the coma, finally being able to escape the cell. Oh, a little bit early there. Really, really cool sound effect there. So yeah, once again, this is the aberrant. This is the main weapon of the game. So the service weapon is gone, or maybe not gone, but the service weapon has effectively been replaced for Dylan with this thing called the aberrant, which is much more melee focused, as we'll see in just a moment. All of the press releases and stuff I'm seeing so far treats this like it is a separate thing from the service weapon. So they treat it like this is not the service weapon. But I think that might be a case where there's a little bit of misdirection going on here. I reckon that this is actually, as I'm saying, the service weapon in a new form, if you will. So they mentioned in a couple of documents in Control 1 that the service weapon was able to change forms, but it was also able to change forms beyond just a gun. So it was able to be, like, they mentioned Excalibur, they mentioned Caliburn, I think, and I think they mentioned a couple of, like, Indian mythological weapons. Mjolnir, I think, is something else they mentioned. So I think that this might be the service weapon in a whole new form, like some sort of messed up, weakened maybe isn't the right term, but changed form. So we'll see a bit more of the aberrant in a moment. We'll see it in action. And then the other thing is the kind of the big hook of the trailer, beyond just the destruction of Manhattan, and that's the fact that the sibling has gone rogue /fishing. that's another reason I think it's the service weapon. Clearly, we're interacting with someone who I'm going to assume is probably the board, based on their talking patterns and the rumbling and all the rest of that. It's probably the board. And the only way we're able to do that in the first game is either through the hotline or the service weapon. Or maybe it was the service weapon. It's been a while since I played Control. It's been about a year. So the fact that we're hearing them here, I think it's probably to do with the aberrant, and if we're hearing them through the aberrant, then I think the aberrant might be the service weapon. It kind of works. And, yeah. So the sibling has gone rogue. It kind of tracks with what we saw going on with Jesse towards the end of Control, especially in the Foundation DLC. Losing that trust with the board. Kind of trying to take the FBC in a different path. Going in a different direction, away from being under the thumb, or the point of the inverted pyramid, I suppose, with them, of the board. So this kind of tracks. The real question is, what effects does that have? The trailer makes it out like it maybe didn't turn out to be the best decision Jesse ever made, because this is clearly, it's clearly not gone well for them in the time since Control 1. Whether or not that's the fault of the fact that they've split ways with the board. But the thing that I noticed, the trailer kind of gives off the vibe that Dylan is working alone, or, with the help of the aberrant board, whatever it ends up being. But he's working by himself. But then reading through the press kits and stuff, they make mention of the fact that Dylan has been woken up by the FBC and is being used as kind of like they say a paranatural weapon, but it's like a special forces unit, if you will. It's like a last resort. But then, but they still, strangely, mention the fact that Jesse is still the director of the FBC in the very same press releases. So if Jesse's still the director, yet the FBC is waking Dylan up, partially to hunt her, why is that? Why is there that sort of seemingly insubordination within the FBC? So I reckon, like I said earlier, that the FBC is effectively split into two. So you've kind of got Jesse's group, who are wanting to try and take it in a different direction without kind of getting out of the control of the board. And then you've got the kind of the fundamentalists, the traditionalists, who are still sticking with the board, and they're the group that has woken up Dylan somehow, or something has happened. Maybe Jesse has stuck the aberrant in them and then has had to flee or whatever. There's been a coup or something, and now this other group is now trying to use Dylan to get to her or something like that. And here we are. Here's the aberrant in action. Stop it there. So yeah, there's the resonance entity that we see in the sky there. I think it's a pretty safe bet that whatever this ends up being, it's going to be the main villain or the main antagonist of the game. Maybe even more so than this. Like, that's just too big and obvious of a bad thing going on. Like this weird black hole sun in the sky for it to just, be ignored. So I think it's safe to say that whatever this is, especially seeing as it was in the Lake House teaser, I think it's safe to say that that is probably the main bad guy of Control 2. I'd also just quickly note that we have Thomas Street Station here, probably another reference to Thomas Zane. Kind of posted on the wrong frame. You can see that the FBC logo's been scratched out in Dylan's poncho here, but he's still got the board inverted pyramid on the collar. So I reckon that because we've seen the FBC split in two, that's my working theory, that the FBC is split in two, and we're trying to fix this while also hunting down Jesse's group. So I reckon that it's probably Dylan's group, if you will, the traditionalists that are sticking with the board, have changed their name, so they've scratched out the FBC, because that's Jesse's group is still referring to themselves as that. and they're, released him to go and fight it. The other thing I noticed, and a couple of other people point out in Discord servers I'm in, is that the board is a lot clearer here than it was in Control 1. Like, it was kind of mumbled, it was muffled. You couldn't hear it very well, even through the service weapon. But here, it's like this big, booming voice. And that's... So people pointed out, and I think I am inclined to agree with them, that it seems to be that in some way, this is, at least partially, some sort of mental plane. So this is an entirely physical reality. At least partially, this is in Dylan's head. Not fully. Reading the press kits and stuff, it does specifically say that some of it's in Dylan's mental mind and some of it's in the real world. And it's kind of fusing together. And I'll explain a little bit more when we see some stuff later, what I think that looks like. But basically what I'm trying to say is that I think the reason the voice of the board is so much clearer here, so much more distinct, is because we're kind of in the head. So the aberrant is kind of, what's it called? Because we're in the mental scape, we're in kind of in line and in tune with the board here, much more than we were just listening through the service weapon. It comes through a lot clearer, we know what they're saying. There's also a lot less of the kind of slash to have double meanings in the admittedly small amount of dialogue we see. So, yeah. A lot of stuff. And this is the bit where I was like, what the hell is happening here? Because I kind of assumed that even if we had a different protagonist, we were playing as Dylan rather than Jesse. I'd figured that much out by this point in the trailer. That we would still, at the very least, be sticking somewhat with the gameplay loop of Control 1, even if it's in a new setting and a new character. This was the point where I was like, yeah, okay, never mind. This is something completely different. So, as we can see here, the aberrant is, instead of being all, SMGs, pistols, shotguns, like the service weapon was, it is all very much melee weaponry. So the two it mentions, and that we've seen already in this trailer, it's mentioned in the press kits and mentioned on Steam pages and all the rest of that we've seen here, is that the aberrant can switch between the dual blades that we saw in that subway tunnel just a moment ago. He kind of threw them on the floor. And can also become this big, giant hammer, like we see here. There's a couple of other forms we'll see that I'll pause and show as we go through. And then the other thing to note is the hiss here. And these are definitely the hiss. But notably, they look far, far more monstrous than anything we saw in Control 1. Like, what's the weirdest thing we saw there? It's the hiss... I want to say distorted, the ones that kind of go invisible and they, chase after you and they shriek and their entire face opens up and stuff. But even them, they were a big step above anything else you saw in that game, which was all very humanoid. And yet they'd still kind of just be middle of the road, normal weird in comparison to this lot. So clearly the hiss is changed quite a bit since even Firebreak, which took place a couple of years after Control 1. Maybe it's something to do with age, maybe it's something to do with the fact it's out of the oldest house and it's interfacing with normal people. But they all look very, very, very different. And this is probably something to do with the fact that we are no longer a kind of an arcade shooter as we were with Control. We are now basically, from the looks of some of the gameplay we're going to see in a moment, a character action game in the style of Devil May Cry, Bayonetta. Not quite to that complexity and speed, but certainly a big, big improvement in the combat over Control 1. So I think it's very different. It's very different from Control 1, but I think that these are kind of fixes for two of Control's biggest problems I saw. Is that one, the service weapon was kind of boring and definitely even useless after you get launched. It didn't play a huge part in the the gameplay loop after you got launch. Once you upgraded launch a few times, it kind of became a bit redundant. So that's clearly been fixed here. And the bigger melee focus, which was something I saw a lot of people wishlist for Control 2. And also the hiss are far, far more interesting than they were in the first game. That's the other big thing I saw, was just, you know, a bunch of zombie guys running at you. It wasn't that interesting. They weren't a hugely interesting faction to fight. They were more interesting as a concept than they were as an actual enemy faction. But, I mean, this looks like that's going to fix that. There you go. So straight away we can see very, very different melee combat. I have to say, I really like this bit of music at the end of the trailer. The like da 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 da. I'm terrible at these sort of things, but like that music there, really good. I kind of hope that it's a bit more exciting than we saw in Control 1 to match with the fact that this is a far stranger and less ordinary set of enemies and combat loop than in the first game. Like, you know, as much as you were flying and throwing things around, there wasn't anything too crazy, the combat loop. This is obviously something completely different. Speaking of, I have no idea what's happening here. They don't look like the hiss. They haven't got any sort of that red tint to them. Some sort of entity, perhaps, but like, I don't know what's going on there. Oh, pause that a sec. What's going on here? I wish I knew how to zoom in properly. Okay, so it looks like there's something to do with the hiss there. Kind of, if you see red, assume the hiss is what we're going through here. A set of doors, lots of doors. Paintings, I think those are, next to windows, desk lamps and stuff. I genuinely got no idea what's going on here. Throughout all of the press releases and stuff and the press kits they're sending out, they say that we're in New York, and they make it out like we're outside a lot. This doesn't look outside. This looks like it's an interior of some kind, but an interior of what? Like a hotel? Something completely different? I genuinely don't know. This is something quite different. This looks kind of like Ashtray Maze levels of weird. But certainly looks cool, at the very least. Yeah, skip by. This thing, we can see, it's a little bit blurry, but we can see another form that the aberrant can take, and it's these big gauntlets that we're using to punch an enemy. And we can see a couple of the design sensibilities from Control still sticking through here. So we kind of got that orange light, which is clearly where you're supposed to go in the level. This looks like it's going to take place, this level or area or whatever it ends up being. It's not an open world, they've confirmed that much. It is sort of like big areas. I'm going to assume, based on the way they're describing it, that the map is quite a bit like the original Control, where it's not an interconnected open world, but it's a lot of big open spaces. But we can see what looks to be the mode as well. Got this new enemy. It kind of looks like it had wings. So another new type of hiss, maybe. Looks like there's some guys over there. Can't tell whether they're an NPC or not. And then, of course, you got the trains running through here. So it looks great. More interiors of hotels or an office space or something, maybe. Looks like... I was going to say office cubicles, but then I saw the arm sets there. Maybe a hotel. A lot of the places kind of give me that sort of liminal mid-20th century hotel vibe. So I'm not quite sure what's going on here. You can see the aberrant in its basic stick state, so I guess when you're not running around with it as a weapon, you've kind of just got it as a big stick in one of your arms. Oh, yeah, okay, so there's the big hammer, giving a meaty hit to that guy there, and a very comparatively normal look at what looks like the New York landscape. But yeah, this is the way they're describing it. It sounds like it's mostly big open outdoor areas on rooftops and street level and all the rest of that. So I imagine those stranger areas indoors and maybe like boss areas or boss arenas or something like that. And there's the thing I was trying to pause at. We can see a strange enemy there that looks like it's kind of just a pair of legs and then this big, thorny, bloated head, upper body thing going on there. So that's definitely a new enemy type. And then the big thing was the fact that this is the 4th weapon variant we've seen. This big scythe thing. So clearly there's even assuming that they've only got the 4 weapon forms we see in this trailer, that still looks like it could be a good meaty bit of combat just there. And then of course this is Control, so you've got the whole flying stick, you've got all of the other paranatural abilities you're no doubt bound to get. So yeah, I think combat is going to be very good here, and I'm excited to see Remedy branch out in that space. That's always been the thing that people are complaining about a lot, that it's kind of stale, repetitive combat that you've seen in a lot of places. So the fact that they're branching out with something that looks quite unique here, I'm excited to see, because as much as I love Remedy, it's my favourite studio out there, it is definitely not unfair to say that their combat and the actual gameplay loop has been comparatively lacking compared to the storytelling and the world building and the aesthetics of the whole thing. They're definitely a vibes first game studio at the moment, and hopefully this new Control Resonant, it kind of pulls the gameplay up to the same level as all the rest of the game, so you don't have to go, oh, it's a fantastic game, but you do have to go around the fact that the gameplay is a bit boring. I hope that I can recommend it wholeheartedly to everyone, and I don't have to drop that in with it as a little bit of a disclaimer. Oh, it's very quick. Yeah, okay, so once again, these look like they might be the normal enemies, these guys with the one long arm kind of dragging it along the floor. Looks like there's quite a lot of these pillory, towering, strange crystalline enemies here. I count at least 3 there. And then there's this guy here who's kind of running at us with a shield. So, big up improving the enemy variety in compared to the first game, where it was just like guy with gun, another guy with gun, guy with rocket launcher, guy with gun but he's smarter, guy with gun and grenades, guy with, there were a couple of cool enemies, but it felt like they could branch out, and clearly they've branched out. And it looked like those sorts, they were just using the basic weapon. This sort, looking at it again, I think that this might be the same as the crystalline enemies we saw in the earlier sorts. When I first kind of saw it flashing by previously, it looked like it was some sort of snaky thing, but it looks like it is. That's its like feet and legs there, branched out, and then that's the kind of the glowing bit we've seen all throughout the rest of this. I'm noting the bodies on the ground here, including this guy here who looks like he's holding a gun. So perhaps these are other FBC agents or something like that. That you come in and then they've been wiped out by this entity here. There you go. Here's some of the kind of the. There's a showcase of some of the paranatural abilities. They've not been lost completely. There's still a couple of those. This looks like it's outside. There's the US flags there, lampposts, maybe a car there, pavement, road maybe. So this looked like it's outdoors in some sort of park area. This enemy, interesting. Big floating, but I don't think it's the big floating head thing we're going to see at the end of the trailer. That bit's interesting. That feels very oldest house, some sort of strange dimension in the oldest house thing. That I'll talk about it a little bit at the end of the trailer, but I don't think that this is outside in New York. Some sort of strange New York expanse. I think that there are going to be areas where we go into a slightly stranger, unique, individual worlds, if you will, which I'll talk about a little bit at the end. A couple more investments. There we go. There's what I'm talking about. So we're seeing a lot more of these scribbles here. That, looking at it, looks like they might be the same as the ones we saw on the piece of paper at the start of the trailer when Jesse first picked up the aberrant. The big thing, of course, is this enemy here, this strange floating head, which very clearly is not Hiss. Like, I am very confident in saying that this is another entity unrelated to the Hiss. It's kind of got that glowing orangey look to it, so, and considering the background as well, I'm fairly confident in saying that this is either its own unique thing or it's something to do with the big entity in the sky. I don't think this is the Hiss. Yeah, like, that's it. And I think this is as good a place as any to talk about what I said earlier with the difference between the usual New York streets and then this sort of strange outer dimension. So reading through the press kits, they mention simultaneously that we are going to be journeying through Dylan's mind and kind of mental state, and some of the areas are based on that, and then other times we're going to be going through the physical New York world, and they make it out like that's separate from the mental state, the mental landscape, if you will. So for a start, I think it's going to be, this is real, this is like an actual thing happening in the Control universe in some way, and it's not just all in his head, because that's really boring and a lame cop-out to have all of this cool stuff going on and just be like, oh yeah, it's because he's dreaming, and nothing interesting is going on outside of that. I think there is going to be something going on in New York, and things have failed and things have gotten this bad. I think it's safe to say that we're going to fix it by the end of the game, because I'll be honest, I've got no interest in playing like Alan Wake 3 with its kind of slightly smaller scale and stakes, and that's in like Washington or whatever, and it's like, oh, it's a couple of guys fighting something in a lake, and then also in the back of my head knowing, oh yeah, and also New York has collapsed in on itself, and it's like, it looks like this now. So I think the gameplay loop is the story hook is we're trying to find Jesse. We're basically inverting the inverse of what we saw in Control 1, where Jesse was trying to find Dylan. We're now playing as Dylan trying to find Jesse. Once again, working for the FBC, but perhaps in a kind of interagency conflict. So we're on the original, if you will, FBC side with the board and all the rest of that. Jesse is kind of spun off into something new, even if they're the ones called the FBC and we're some new name. And what we're trying to do is when we're fixing it, we're going to drop from the real New York world, which we've seen in the rest of the trailer, and we're going to drop into these sort of boss arenas that really ramp up the what the hell is going on factor, with the kind of the stranger enemies, the more unique, personable enemies, because whoever that is, it feels like it's tailored specifically to Dylan. Maybe it's someone creepy in their past, some like FBC researcher was poking and prodding them while he's a prime candidate, and he's kind of in his mind he's made them this boss with the strange head. This doesn't feel like the Hiss. The Hiss feels like the Hiss and the mold and the enemies like that feels like they're going to be the main enemy of the real world, the New York sections. And then when we drop into the mindscape, the mental scape in Dylan's head, this is kind of what we're going to do. And so effectively, because Dylan's psychically powerful or whatever, he's kind of forcing, in a localized area, his mental projections into the real world, and that's where you get these kind of boss arenas from, and these strange enemies. So what I reckon the gameplay loop is going to be is you go through these areas of New York, you're fighting the Hiss, and you're fighting the Mode, and you're fighting what other groups of enemies you fight, to get, one, to find some way to get to Jesse, and two, to resolve this. And the way you're going to resolve that is you're going to be dropping out of the real world, if that makes sense, or you're going to be kind of forcing Dylan's mental landscape into the real world temporarily, fighting these, because I reckon this is probably a story boss, fighting these guys, and somehow by doing that you're going to in some way restore or begin the restoration process for New York or for Manhattan. Because I do genuinely think that for as weird and crazy and out of this world everything is, I do think they're going to fix it by the end of the game to restore that status quo and allow them to make new stuff in the Remedyverse, because I have no reason to believe this is supposed to be the end of it, to kind of continue with the Remedyverse without having to go, yeah, so we're back in Bright Falls and we're fighting the dark presence as some old woman in a lake, but also New York has exploded and it looks like this now. I think they are going to resolve this in some capacity by the end of the game. There's the trailer. There's the logo, I should say.
Pace yourself. It's gonna get weirder.
And once again, new set of resonance entities. They don't look anything like the ones we saw at the start or in the middle of the trailer. So it looks like there's going to be a lot of entities, a lot of resonance-based entities like the Hiss, like Polaris, like Hedron, like whatever ends up being in Dylan's head, like the big thing in the sky. It looks like there's going to be a lot going on here in terms of otherworldly entities. The other thing I'm noticing here is that, or I should go back a little bit, 2026. That's an interesting thing to say, because I think the release order that I think a lot of people keeping up with Remedy were expecting was it was going to be Firebreak this year and the start of next year, because they delayed some of the DLC for that. Max Payne remakes, which I don't think anyone was expecting to be the Game Awards, because that's not how Rockstar works, and they're doing that with Rockstar. 2026 going to be Max Payne remakes, and then 2027 was going to be Control 2. But the fact that this is coming out in 2026, which is great, I did genuinely think 2027. The fact this is coming out in 2026 does probably mean that Max Payne remakes are going to be 2027. Which, I'm fine with. I'm more of a Control fan than I am a Max Payne fan. I still haven't got around to playing those as much as they've been in my backlog for a while now. So I am excited to see Control, even ahead of the Max Payne remakes. It's just something that I figured I should bring up. I think a lot of people were expecting Max Payne remakes 26, Control 2, or Control Resonant as it is now, 2027. Clearly that isn't the case. It looks like it's the other way around. But
it's gonna get weirder.
Trailer. I think that's it. Notice Annapurna Interactive at the bottom there. But the other big thing is the fact that this isn't Epic Games exclusive like Alan Wake 2 was, because this is being seemingly published and funded entirely by Remedy and Annapurna. So because of that, there's none of the Epic Games exclusivity wackiness, the kind of the stuff they were pulling with Alan Wake 2, which I'm hoping, with the kind of the hype from Alan Wake 2, even above that of Control, and everything else going on, the fact it's on Steam, I'm really, really hoping that this gets big. I'm really hoping that Control Resonant does really well, especially kind of building off the hype of Alan Wake 2. I really do think it has the potential, if it does come out with a couple of really good previews and trailers before release date, I really do think it could do really well, and I hope it does. I'm not one of those people who want to keep their hobbies niche. I like the idea that I have loads of people to talk to about Control theories. I really do hope it does well. But yeah, I think that's everything in the trailer that I noticed as a single person. Maybe if I had another guy to talk to and bounce off, I'd have a little more. But I think that's everything on my end. I think that's everything I noticed. So I hope that got you excited. I hope you've been able to keep up with what I'm saying. I recognise that some of the sections may be a little bit confusing because I'm just rambling this off the top of my head. Don't have the wonders of a script. I hope it kind of was coherent. You understood what I was saying. And I hope you're excited for Control 2, because this is my most anticipated game for years now. And this trailer blew me away. It made the entire Game Awards worth it. And I really hope it does well. And I think it looks fantastic. It's a really exciting direction for Remedy. After, all of that time spent making arcade shooters, and third-person shooters. I mean, what games have they made that aren't like that? I think it's good that we are seeing Remedy branch out. First it was survival horror with Alan Wake 2, rather than just arcade shooters like beforehand. Then it was horde shooters with Firebreak. Much as they didn't necessarily stick the landing with that one, it was at least a good experiment. And now we're on a full-on character action hack and slash with this. So I'm really liking the evolution on all fronts here. So we've got story and world building and aesthetics all firing up to 11 already in just this first trailer, and it looks like the gameplay is finally catching up with everything else. So it looks like this is going to be really good for Remedy. It looks amazing. I'm really hoping it sticks to the landing. Yeah. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed it, and goodbye.